So I think we can go ahead and get started. We'll let people funnel in if they funnel in. Thank you guys for being here. I'm Shay Coburn with the City of Delta. On the phone with us tonight is Casey McPherson, and she's with our Department of Local Affairs Community Development Office. So she does planning commissioner trainings kind of all around the state and a bunch of other planning related work. So we're excited to have her, and thanks for taking the time, Casey. I don't know if we have any non-commissioners here in the room or online, but just a reminder that this is a training for planning commissioners, so we're going to be kind of talking a lot about commissioners' roles and responsibilities and meetings and things like that. If you're from the public, you're welcome to listen and hang out, but we will be really having conversation, public comment, or I don't know, time for public to be involved. It's really about the planning commissioners tonight. If you guys want to ask a question, Casey can't see you in this room, so raise your hand or start speaking up loudly so she can hear, or if you raise your hand, we can pause her back here and ask that she pause real quick for a question, and then same with folks online. If you want to make a comment or have a question online, there's a little raise your hand function, and then we can get you unmuted and ask. Does that work okay for you, Casey?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay, awesome. Well, anything else from anyone? Hand it over to Casey?
Yep, let's go ahead and hand it over to Casey and she can get started.
Awesome. All yours.
Cool. Thanks, Shay. Much appreciated. Okay, hi, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. As Shay mentioned, I'm Casey McPherson, the Senior Planner in the Community Development Office. And yes, I do a lot of planning stuff around the state, and I really think that these might be my favorite trainings. I don't know, they're just a good time, and there's always something new that comes up. So I appreciate your time tonight. I'm going to just give a couple of thoughts here at the beginning. The training does run about 2 hours, and I've added some content that has never been seen before. So I'm testing it out on you all tonight. Hopefully it goes well, and hopefully we'll stay on time. But I wanted to flag that because I do like to include a lot of hypothetical scenario questions that we can discuss as a group. And I may need to just rush us along through a couple pieces if it turns out that we're running short on time. So I'll keep that managed, but just to set that expectation. It is a lot more fun the more engaged we all are. So as Shay said, please, yes, speak up. If you're online, try and put something in the chat. If I don't see it, speak up. The more engaged, the better. If you have stories or examples, those are great. And of course, responding to those scenario questions. I have on here that topics are anticipated to be 90% applicable. What I mean there is, this is what we see most of the time, but every locality has their own rules and policies and regulations. And so, it's going to be generally true, but if you're thinking, oh, we do it a little bit differently, yeah, you probably do. And if some curveball comes up, then it's always good to go talk with staff, talk with your attorney, whoever is the appropriate person, and figure out what that other 10% is. Of course, on that note, I've got the little legal disclaimer. We're going to talk a lot of law talk, but it's not legal advice, just a general, good old-fashioned planning training. And what will we cover? Oh, was that a question?
Yeah, sorry, it's Shay. If you're able to do presentation mode, if that doesn't mess you up, just to make the text a little bigger on our screen, we have some people in the back, kind of far back, that might appreciate a bigger screen.
Hang on.
Oh, and I turned the chat off, so sorry if that messes you up as well.
No, that's fine. We can just do it with voices.
Perfect.
Hang on, let me try it this way. Thanks for letting me know the text was a little small. Is that bigger now?
That legal notice. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah or no?
For some reason, a little bit.
Can you do it from beginning of the slide, or does that cut you off from the Zoom?
Say that again. What do you mean?
When you do the slideshow, if you do from beginning, so that way it fills the full screen. Does that work, or does that mess up your Zoom on your end?
I think it's just not in the presentation mode. It's in the mode where you can see the notes and stuff, which isn't a big deal. It just makes it a little smaller.
Yeah, clicking from beginning doesn't change that mode.
If you drag that bar down below the slide where the notes go, it will probably make the slide a little bigger, and I think that can work great. Yay!
Oh, I see what's happening. Hang on. You're
Are we on different screens?
Yeah. Oops. Whoa. That's not what I want to do. No. Slideshow. How come it doesn't? Yeah, that's weird. Yeah, it's just not going to slide. Okay, yeah, I can just do it like that.
Perfect.
Is that big enough now?
I think that's great.
Okay. My
Just
goodness.
for you guys in the back? Yeah, okay, we're getting thumbs up.
That's so funny. I've got this other screen that shows it fully in the screen. I don't know what in the world is happening. Okay, back on track. Now we're on what we'll cover today. Okay, so today, now that we've got our technical issues hopefully behind us, a little bit of welcome and introductions. We'll cover why plan and planning authority, roles and responsibilities, long-range planning and implementation, the tools, effective meetings and decision-making, that's a bit of a lengthy piece, and rounded out with legal and ethical issues. I've got some scenario questions peppered throughout, although, you know, the first half is kind of heavy on me talking, but then there will be a lot of discussion sort of in the middle. And then I've got an extra bit. This started as planning during a pandemic, you know, sort of when disruption happened at the beginning and as it sort of took full force. We got a lot of requests for that. And I'm keeping it in there. And this is part of the thing I'm going to test out on you all tonight. Thank you. Just to see if it still works for planning during disruptions, because we've got some good resources for you to consider about continuity of operations, no matter what the disruption is. So we'll see how that goes. Just a couple slides on that at the end. But here in the introductions section, I wish I could see you all, and I'm sorry that I can't, but I was hoping that we could do some sort of introduction just to see who's in the room, meaning name, role, maybe how long you've been in your position, and then if you want to, maybe a coming local project that you're excited about. Would that be possible, Shay? I can't see any cues.
Yeah. I think that'll work fine. Maybe we could do the folks in this room and then we'll move on to the folks online and I can just call them out.
That works,
Yeah. Do you want to start in the front?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Jim McCracken, Delta County Engineering. I'm with Delta County since July of 20.
August, Town of Cedar Ridge Planning Commission. I've been there about 3 months.
Dick Carton, Chairman of the Cedar Ridge Planning Commission, been for this for about a year. William Federal Planning Commission, Delta, about a year and a half.
Wayne Bonus, District 2, Surface Creek Area Planning, Delta County Planning Commission, been on the board about 4 years.
Darrell Roberts, the City of Delta Planning Commission. I don't know how long I've been on it.
A while.
Seasoned.
Planning Commission, 2.5 years or so. Roger Christian, Hotchkiss Planning Commission. I've been on the board for about 3 years.
Larry Wilkening, I'm the mayor of Hotchkiss and also on the Planning Commission. I've been doing this for about 3.5 years now.
Steve Track, Delta County Planning Commission, been on for 4 years. Let's see, for a project, I heard you say something about that. I have some interest in affordable housing county's role in maybe providing some leadership in affordable housing planning and working with the towns. I'd be interested in hearing any perspectives about that from some of you other town planning commissioners.
County Hill City of Delta, Chairman of the Planning. I've also been on the Delta County Planning, total over 6 years.
Mike Plumley, County Planning Commission for 12 years and on the Board of Adjustment in the county for this year. So we're doing introductions, Hardy and the two ladies, if you'd like to just do an introduction, how long you've been on whatever board you're on, and if there's a interest of a project or topic that you're looking at from a planning perspective. Hardy, go ahead.
We're from Peonia,
Okay.
and we just got a Board of Appeals, which we just did.
Okay.
Long overdue. We're really happy about it, and we're hoping it keeps the inspection line.
Very good. Hardy?
I'm Hardy, I'm from Cedar Ridge District 2, and I'm on the planning commission. I've been here, I don't know, a couple, 3-4 months, I guess, maybe.
Nice. Now I'll just call out some names online. Dick Gilmore.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Dick Gilmore on the Delta Planning Commission. Been serving, I don't know, 3 years or so.
Great. Cindy Watson.
Yes, this is Cindy Watson. I am new to the Planning Commission Board. I just recently came on. I am in District 1, and I'm just looking forward to seeing different projects within the county and having some input and see what everybody has to say.
Thank you. Ian Oster.
Yes, Ian Oser, and I'm recent appointee to the Board of Appeals in Peonia.
Thank you.
Can you?
Eli Walcott.
Hi, this
Sorry,
is Eli Walcott. Hi, I hope you can hear me. This is Eli Walcott. I'm on the Planning Commission representing District 3 in the North Fork area.
Thank you. Jacob Gray.
Okay. Yes, this is Jacob Gray.
And which board or commission do you serve on?
I am on the Delta County Planning Commission, District 3.
Thank you. Jay Stooksbury.
Hey, this is Jay Stooksbury. I'm on the City of Delta Planning Commission, and I've been on this board for, I don't know, maybe like 4 years, 5 years, something like that.
4 or 5 years. You were cutting out a little bit, Jay, but I think everyone heard that. City of Delta, 4 or 5 years. Thank you. Joanne Kalanick.
Hi, yes, I'm Joanne Kalanick. I'm just an interested citizen journalist and resident of Hotchkiss. Just interested in the training.
Great, thank you. Katie Darlington.
Yeah, hi, my name's Katie. I am part of the Delta County Planning Commission, District 3. I've been on the commission for about a year now, I guess.
Thank you. Mary Backren.
Hi, Mary Backren, Mayor of Peonia and on the Planning Commission in Peonia.
Ron White.
Good evening, everyone. Ron White, about 1.5 years on the City of Delta Planning Commission, and blessed with being just in time to get involved with the refresh of the comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Ron. Tom Kay.
Yeah, Tom K is having microphone issues, but he is here. He is the chair of the Delta County Planning Commission and asked me to kind of speak on his behalf.
Awesome, thank you. William Puconi?
Yes, this is Will Pumpkiny. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm newly on the Town of Orchard City Planning Commission at home with COVID. How about that?
Glad you're at home.
Thanks for sharing all of that. And I believe the last group to introduce themselves would be the Town of Orchard City, and I think there's multiple folks, so I'll let you guys just go around the room.
I am Leah, Planning Commission staff. I work for the Town of Orchard City. Everyone's kind of sitting out in the room. So we have Bill Thornton here. He's newly on the Planning Commission. I've got our chair, Holly Motts, Aaron St. Peter, Mel Cook, and Clark Ashby.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a good group tonight. If there's anyone I didn't call out on the phone or the Zoom meeting, please speak up, and sorry if I messed up your name. Sarah.
Sarah Crawford, Delta County Engineering Department. I've been on for about 4 months.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I think we got everyone.
All right.
Do us back here.
Kate Kelly, the Delta County Planner.
Okay, City of Delta.
Carl Holm, County Delta Planning.
Kim Henderson, Delta County Administrative Assistant.
Everett Neal, Delta County Code Compliance.
Bobby LaValle, Delta County Administrator.
Okay, I think that's it. So Casey, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Hey, while we were doing that, I clicked some button. Can you see the screen better now, or do you see like the presentation and notes and stuff?
We see the preview of the next slide. So the main slide is a little more reduced that way.
Okay. And now you see what it was before, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to figure out these mysteries of what's happening tonight. Thank you. Thanks for your patience on that. Okay, so let's continue onward. This is a great group. You know, I think this might be one of the larger groups and certainly most jurisdictions compared to when I usually do these. So, you know, you get award for most participants. Well done. That'll be good for storytelling that we can get into later. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is something I affectionately call the DOLA commercial. And it's just a few slides on some resources that I want to make sure everyone is aware of and has access to. So first off, we're broken up in DOLA in several ways, but the two major ones are the Division of Local Government field team is the little map on the left, and then the Division of Housing has a similar field team as well. So, you know, make sure that you know those people. They're sort of our gatekeepers to all kinds of programs and knowledge and whatnot. So we have the sort of substantive program people like me, and then we have our field staff as well. Just wonderful. I'm sure many of you would nod your heads and agree. There, okay. Oops, there. Just a little bit of navigation as we do this new approach. Okay, so another thing I want to point out is that we generally do technical and financial assistance, so non-regulatory agency. And as I mentioned, I'm in the community development office where we work on land use planning, integrating planning with things like water, housing, hazards. And we also have the Main Street program for downtown revitalization assistance. We've got the becoming robust website, still working on it, but if you are a visual person where you like reading, we've got lots of information on there, a lot of what we'll cover tonight in other forms. So if you want to dig in on 3 Mile plans or the master plan primer, you can take a look at our website for more information. We've also got a site on the land use survey. Every 5 years, we conduct a planning and land use survey so that we can have some longitudinal data on planning trends across the state. We completed that at the end of 2020. Of course, it got disrupted for obvious reasons, and we are working on finalizing the report now. So keep an eye out. If you're not on the CDO listserv, shoot me an email. I'd love to get you signed up so that you can get information of all kinds. And when we do finalize that, the survey report, we'll send it out on there. We also have a page for Main Street. So take a look at that if that's something you're interested in. And if you are, I can hook you up with the right people in my work group for that. And then, as I mentioned, we do some integration work. So first here, a couple slides on hazards. We've got a resource called Planning for Hazards. It's a guide, but it really is most effective living online. And you can look up anything you might be interested in. It talks about how to integrate hazards into your long-range planning. You can search by hazard type. It's sort of a really great, robust resource with lots of example code language and things like that. And as you're considering it, this is the Colorado Forest Service Forest Atlas, just a lot of fun, I think. And here it's showing you the wildfire risk, and you can also look at that as compared to development in the wildland urban interface. Your region's doing a pretty good job. Let me just toggle back and forth a little bit there. Well done. You can zoom in more, of course, if you'd like to hop on there and get to a little bit more granularity. But that's a good one to know about too, as far as hazards go. As far as demographic resources, which is, as someone mentioned, coming on board just in time to start a comp plan update, you're probably looking at demographic resources. So we also house the State Demography Office, and that is just a treasure trove of data. So I pulled just a little bit of community profile information. You can look at general population, check out the trend of going up, a little dip and going back up. You can look at why might that be. Here's the birth and death rates kind of going in tandem and then separating a little bit. But of course, overall population has seemed to grow still in your area, because look at that migration line. It's going way up from in-migration. And then if you want to start thinking about other topics, like someone mentioned housing, you might take a look at, well, you know, what's our population by age and what's happening with that. So they've got information on projected population change. So you can take a look at this and say, okay, so we've got a big increase in ages 75 and up. So what kind of housing might we have? You can take a look at housing units. And if you look here, both owner and rental occupied, the vast majority are single units. So that might lead you down to thinking, okay, you know, what do those look like? Are they age-friendly units? It gets you some data to have those kinds of conversations. Lots of good information there, and more information to come. So the census was first released in April of this year, and we learned some good information. Our state population's almost at 6 million. That's a 15% almost increase since 2010, which makes us the 6th highest in our growth percentage among the US states. And that means that we'll gain a House seat in the House of Representatives. I'm sure you've been hearing about that. And then we're going to get some more information starting next month. So the demography team is working hard on that, and they're pretty excited. That should give us some more illumination as well. Pretty exciting. So that, end of commercial, is a little look at some of the tools that we like to keep handy for you. And if any of that spurred some thoughts on other things you might like, feel free to get in touch. We've got more than that. I just wanted to make sure you had a flavor of the kinds of things that, that we work on that we can provide and get you connected with. So with that done, we're going to go into the main event and start with why plan and planning authority. So first, very generally, planning helps us to be more efficient and more effective. So in other words, a defined process in our development code, it ensures fair treatment, makes sure that we don't have to make things up as we go, and that ends up saving us money and time. It helps communities seize opportunities. So, for example, if we've done the visioning work to want to be sort of a park-oriented community, and then a parcel comes up in a good area, then because we've laid the groundwork for that, it smooths the process to sort of get our ducks in a row and close deals of that kind. It also prevents undesirable development. So to the point of the picture here, haphazard development can create eyesores and really problems. It can also create development patterns that are expensive to serve and maintain. So from the very urban to the very rural, seen it all, and I'm sure you've all run across examples that make you wonder what in the world someone was thinking or not thinking. Here's a quote I just like to keep in my back pocket, and you might as well as you're going about town. Who would invest in a corporation that didn't have a business plan? No one, right? The same is true for a community if it doesn't have a plan. So every successful institution, corporation, or community needs a plan. Like that one. Now moving us into grounding authority. So this is basically a nod to the police power is what it is. The rights of government to establish laws and ordinances to preserve public order, tranquility, and promote health, safety, and welfare. So that police power is from the US Constitution, reserved to the states and granted to local governments through statute. And in Colorado, it's granted quite liberally. We are a state of local control for land use. We have very few statutory planning requirements, which I'll go over in just a couple slides. And the grant of that authority either comes from statute for statutory communities, or there's also charters if you're a home rule. And here, a note on regulations. What's key here is that regulations be tied to a valid public purpose, that's the substantive due process, and enacted and implemented so that those affected have a meaningful opportunity to participate. That's the procedural due process, and I'm going to spend, we'll talk more about substantive due process, but we'll talk a lot about procedural due process because, lots of planning commissioners in the room and very much responsible for following those procedures you have laid out. So we'll spend a lot of time on that tonight, a little later on. And here is what's required for planning in our state. Just a few things, really. We've got master or comp plans. The statutes use them interchangeably. Master plans for communities that are big enough or have a fast enough growth rate. Subdivision regulations for counties, 3-mile plans for municipalities, and then water in comp plans with an asterisk sort of everywhere. And I've got a deep dive on that in a minute because it's not exactly a requirement, it's an if-then, and I'll explain that with a visual in a little bit later. First, we're going to talk more about roles and responsibilities. Who's involved in this game of planning? We'll talk about elected officials, planning commission, staff, citizens, and applicants in turn. And thanks for hanging with me. As I mentioned, it's a lot of talking here at the beginning, but we'll get you some scenario questions soon. Okay, first, elected officials. General role is to make policy and legislate, use that enabling authority and maybe the charter to protect the public interest, hire staff, appoint boards, provide general direction and two-way communication. So generally it's that providing direction and communication, not micromanaging, that kind of thing. Planning commission really struggled between the magnifying glass or sort of a process picture, but kind of both really. So the planning commission is that appointed but not elected advisory board, preparing the master or comp plan and applying policy and regulations, providing that land use expertise. And from the sounds of the introductions, you all have quite a lot of it, whether you've been on for a little bit or a long time. Sounds like a lot of expertise in the room and across the region. Reviewing development applications, adopting and consistently using bylaws. I might add updating to that as well. And regularly assessing policies and regulations and then revisioning. If you're a community who has just completed a land use code update, I think the county has, then you're probably considering, how's that working? What issues is it illuminating? Do we need to make tweaks? And really returning probably to the work of re-envisioning and I don't know, maybe working on IGAs, things like that. Continuing with the process. All right, now some notes on staff. So these are, clerk, planner, administrator, attorney, etc. Staff and consultants as well provide technical expertise and guidance, information, training, research, the staff report, critical, notice meetings and communicate with applicants, helping us avoid the ex parte, right? We'll talk about that later in the legal ethical section. Ensure good communication and offer professional opinions. So, one thing that I want to pause here and talk about is the importance of educating the public on the role of staff. I hear from time to time examples of some confusion, whether it be in a public meeting or a public hearing, about the appropriate role of staff. How come they're not speaking up? How come? Just a lot of how come type questions. And so one good thing to do is, as you're laying out what's to happen in the meeting or in the hearing, underscoring that, making sure that you're sort of supporting what the role is and supporting clarification of that. Basically, the goal being instilling respect and trust about what's going on, because when that's not made clear, there are lots of questions that understandably come up, and sometimes it can turn ugly. Sometimes I hear from communities that I've presented to in the past about sort of even personal attacks or that kind of thing. So a good rule of practice is to be that champion for the education of clarity of roles and who's doing what, why, how, etc. Okay, and citizens. The role of citizens: participate fully, advise appointed and elected officials, ask questions, and offer input and solutions. Lots going on every plate. And then finally, applicants. So here the role is to learn and respect adopted rules and processes, to expect fair and predictable process, but not work the system, communicate issues and concerns, and have realistic expectations and understanding of the role of government. In other words, it's that, no late materials or last minute changes, no ex parte communications, and basically understanding that when we follow the adopted process and comply with the policies and the regulations that are in place, projects tend to have more community support. So some general advice would be to slow down and reflect together. That can be very effective. Consider what isn't working, what is, where are issues and trends emerging, and does that mean we should adjust anything of what we have in place? We do recommend an annual meeting with the elected board. That can be helpful for communication, for trust building, all kinds of things. And as you consider any trends and things that would go smoother if we just made a rule, change something, this issue X keeps coming up, maybe we should just have a rule about it, make that recommendation to the elected board. Okay, lots of talking, as promised. Here's our first scenario question, and I'm just going to give you one to warm you up. And here's how we'll do it. Because we don't have the chat, just feel free to unmute and say what you think about this. The Planning Commission makes a unanimous decision, but the town board overturns it, which does happen often. What actions could the Planning Commission take to address their concern about being overturned? So some options here, and maybe you'll think of others as well, feel free to. A is talk with staff for feedback, ask for regular check-ins with the board to cover these kinds of topics. B, call the mayor, get more details. C, attend the town board's next public meeting and raise the issue for discussion. Or D, post a letter on social media to make the Planning Commission's point of view known and understood by the community. Any thoughts? Just yell them out.
All of the above.
I'm guessing it's not D.
Good instinct. Social media doesn't help always, does it? Well, I hear some discussion. So since it's the first one, I'll cut you some slack. I would say the answer is A. Talk with staff, get feedback, try and do some regular check-ins with the board to figure out what's going on. What can we do better? How can we avoid this? Some other tips that come up in this kind of arena are reminders on making sure that decisions are based on the criteria and on the findings of fact and not on opinion. Sometimes that's why decisions are overturned. But it really depends on what's going on locally. So good to open up those communication channels. All right, well done. We'll have many more to come. But for now, we'll move into the next segment, long-range planning and implementation. So this is that tools discussion. And we're going to cover a whole bunch. We'll talk a bit about the master or comp plan, 3-mile plan, annexation policies, IGAs, PUDs, 1041, so many planning tools that we have at our disposal, zoning, building codes, and of course, incentives and programs. Those all can come up. So first off with the comp plan. So this is the community's vision and roadmap. And in Colorado, most master plans are advisory, and they can be mandatory if they're adopted with sufficient detail as a regulation, but generally advisory. It's an important process though, and we do encourage doing the comp plan process or update before getting to implementation tools. You know, if the plan was regulatory, if we were in a different context, you could consider that it might be more difficult or perhaps less effective as a planning tool because you may end up limiting the vision based on, you know, what is thought locally about regulation. So it could effectively skip a step. And in other words, visioning is an important exercise. Some other thoughts that can come up sometimes in communities is that, you know, if it's too much to adopt a comp plan or update all at once, then some communities do it by part or element and review or update one piece a year so that it's not a full overhaul every 5 or 10 years, which is about the recommendation and can be kind of a lot depending on which community we're talking about. Yeah, and sometimes we do hear, hey, things haven't changed very much, but and sometimes they don't, but often they do, and it's worth taking a look at maybe the demography office's information and considering it. And if your plan is older than 10 years, certainly I would recommend updating it. Here's some standard plan elements, probably not surprising, you know, natural resources. I've put in red here what's required. First, recreation and tourism has been required for quite a long time in Colorado and was the only requirement until last year when we had water asterisks, because it's kind of required. Oops, there we go. So here's what happened. Last year we had a House bill that said, okay, water in comp plans is not required, but if a local government is going to include it, then they must do 3 things. Here, the bullets listed right there, which are really things that probably would be done anyway. They're consulting with the entities that supply water locally, identifying water facilities and making sure that the infrastructure is there to meet the estimated demand, and including water conservation policies. We do also have a land use and water planner that is directed by this bill to provide technical assistance to communities. So if you're interested in a water element and integrating water and land use, let me know and I will get you connected with that staffer. Lots of good information. And you can also start with our water and land use webpage. It's a good place to get some more background as you move into some of those discussions. So back on the comp plan, it provides a lot of guidance. As I mentioned, the community's vision, and I like to say, you know, if you've got a cracked foundation, you're going to end up with cracks other places. So this is really a place to have strong guidance so that when you come to rezoning requests, updating the land use code, annexing, all these other things, overall vision for growth and development, you've done that work with the community and got that buy-in. And then you can do your implementation tools and they'll be strong. Other long-range plans, sub-area master plans, you know, water conservation, some have a downtown plan, stormwater management, you know, depending on the community, you may have different plans. Some like to have it all as one beefy sort of document, others separate, but the real key is, do they support or conflict with each other? So it's good to look through those, see if they're supporting or if there's any contradiction. A little note on 3-mile plans. So this is that requirement that a municipality before annexing have a 3-mile plan and that it's updated every year. Just a plan for the 3 miles outside of the boundary. One thing that I would mention here is there seems to be an increase in confusion about what a 3-mile plan can and can't do, specifically from residents in unincorporated county areas near the municipality. There have been some communities who have even come up with some outward-facing documents about what it does, what it doesn't, because some residents have said, you know, hey, you're rezoning my property, or other similar things, which a 3-mile plan cannot do. So my thought there is it's a good idea to have something in place, some easy information to point to get ahead of that wrong information that can kind of churn through the rumor mill. Comes up from time to time. Okay, a couple slides on cooperative planning. Very, a good idea, and it takes some good work to get done. Cooperative planning sort of respects that planning issues are complex, they're interrelated, and they do not respect political boundaries. It also can help with the fact that applicants will shop for the best deal, of course, and it can address incompatible standards that make for rough transitions at jurisdictional boundaries. And it's also a way to use tax dollars more efficiently. In the Colorado Revised Statutes, we've got this citation here because they do authorize and encourage local governments to cooperate or contract with other units of local government for planning purposes. And how's that done? Well, some thoughts on long range and other. So for long range, you might be thinking of IGAs and growth areas, involving each other in comp plan updates, revenue sharing sometimes, and developing a shared vision for certain areas. So especially related to infrastructure. Development review, sometimes jurisdictions will refer applications to others and consider their comments, or just refer applications within a specific area of common interest. So that's sort of making sure that that development at a municipal boundary is happening in a way that makes sense, and that the standards could meet and make for not rough transitions. All right, a couple trends. You know, this is what I tend to see across the state. So I like to say you're the experts in your jurisdiction. You know what might apply, what trends might be rising. This is what I see just generally statewide. Some trends that are emerging is planning for an aging demographic and thinking especially about public health and livability related to that, integrating hazards into decision making, thinking about water quantity and quality, affordable housing. Man, this is in no particular order. That should be the top of this non-ordered list though. Strategizing toward economic diversification, and related to that, thinking about economically sustainable development patterns, so that infrastructure and maintenance over time. And then considering social equity has been rising as well. And this is in a little red box because I want to spend a couple slides on this. One thing that we've been noticing is funding programs have been increasing the focus on this. So it can be helpful as a locality to consider it and put some things in place. You know, we've got, for example, if you've heard of House Bill 1271, the affordable housing programs. If not, let me know and let's talk. But we're managing some funding for planning and for affordable housing development, and the bill language includes social equity considerations in scoring, and that's becoming increasingly popular. So given that, we have this graphic from CDPHE's Office of Health Equity, and it's probably too small for you to see if anyone's squinting right now. I'm even squinting at my screen, it's right in front of me. But basically, I just want a big picture visual to show that we do have some resources well, this is CDPHE. So I should say, there are some resources that you can get your hands on to sort of assess what's going on. This one helps you look at these different words: diversity, inclusion, equality, and equity, that frankly can become buzzwords, and helps us break them down so that they don't. And look at, what does this look like in practice, and how is success defined? So thinking of diversity as the differences in all of the people across our community. Inclusion as, what do we do with our diversity? Are they all able to get to the table? Giving equality is giving everyone the same access, and equity, leveling the playing field. And I like to dig in on that one. I'm a bicycle nerd. I do like them. So I like this graphic. And so this one I think is particularly helpful of thinking, as we're considering these things, how do we want to handle them? Do we want to go for the equality or go for the equity? And basically what it's getting at is looking at the community and considering, well, we could provide the same access, say, to a public meeting, but is that working? Can a single parent with young kids attend an evening public hearing? Probably not. What about people with evening jobs? Definitely not. Digital public engagement has been increasing, and it's great, but also consider broadband access and technology barriers that can come up in there. And basically, to me, the bottom line is it's best to have a multi-pronged approach for public engagement, especially big efforts for those of you considering, say, a comp plan update. All right. Now, meetings and decision making. I've got several thoughts to ground us, and then we'll have quite a few scenario discussions in here. A lot of fun. So let's get going into meetings and decision making. This is the first. I've got a few questions for you. I'm wondering if your meetings look like this, maybe a little formal, maybe intimidating, or sometimes they look like this, a little casual. Sometimes informality is nice, but sometimes it can blur the sort of boundaries and create some process fairness issues. Or sometimes your meeting might look like this. I think we're all familiar with this one. Now, I wish I could see your faces, but I would bet that you're nodding. I know this comes up. So we're going to talk about meetings in a couple of buckets, really just the top two: legislative and quasi-judicial. There are also administrative actions, of course. Thank you, staff. But we're going to really focus on legislative actions when you're really making law policy, versus quasi-judicial when you're more acting like a judge, determining rights or obligations of an individual. So let's dive into that. Public meetings. This is when you're wearing that legislative hat. So creating public policy, it's got a permanent or general character, and it's widely applicable. And the key here is to seek input and be the champion of broad and inclusive public participation. Explaining the context, the big picture, process, and timeline, demonstrating active listening, limiting jargon and acronyms, that's an accessibility question, and making it relevant. Sometimes people don't know why we're doing this planning stuff, but we know, and we need to explain that. Act as community ambassadors and remain courteous no matter what, which can be tough. So effectively, the things that should be done when making law. All right, now quasi-judicial. Public hearings are different, very defined rules, and really it comes down to protecting procedural due process, and that comes down to notice and opportunity to be heard. As a practice pointer, you could also consider including which types of decisions are quasi-judicial in your code. So a little food for thought there. But yeah, this is the process. It's protecting people's due process rights as property is involved, and giving notice and the opportunity to be heard. Some key points here are announcing rules in advance and enforcing them consistently, remaining unbiased while hearing evidence, showing that you're listening, importance of a strong chair with a supportive board. So that's staying on task, avoiding tangents. We'll talk about the chair more in a minute. And input only during the notice public hearing. We'll talk about ex parte later on. And asking the questions, that are designed to get at, does this application meet our standards, as well as making careful motions. So that's the big picture. And we'll get into some of these subpoints now. But first, what makes a meeting particularly effective? Really, I think the key is that everyone has a meaningful opportunity to participate. As we're seeing, that's becoming more and more creative with digital means and others. People feel that they were heard, relevant issues were discussed, ones related to the standards, no tangents or discussions about issues that the code or plan doesn't address. As a tip, you can start with a staff report. I've heard so many configurations of how communities like to handle this, but starting with a staff report seems to be a strong way to do it. Also, it helps with tone setting. An effective meeting also means that the commission's decision was clear, what happened, why, and that it's reasonably defensible. Okay. Now we'll spend a little bit of time on the chair in particular, in the hot seat. A strong chair can make this meeting even more effective. So the key here is a great communicator that sets the tone. What is the right tone? Civil, professional, ensuring that civility, strong listener, the timekeeper, and the enforcer. And a key here is don't hand over control of the meeting. All right. Yeah, we'll stop there for now. Another thought and a kind of a visual that I like is thinking of the chair as the air traffic controller. This is I've lifted from Jerry Dahl. He says to focus on the next plane and not on each moment. So in other words, there's so much that's going on, but the chair is the one who's thinking about, watching the clock. Are we on time? What's happening now? What's the next step that needs to happen? And what's the next big piece we need to move on to? Are we on track? Really keeping control of all of that. So in other words, being that timekeeper, ensuring there's no dead air where people want to jump in, using cues, hey, we're on item 2 of 6 and it's 9. That doesn't sound great. And then another tip would be that making sure the other planning commission members back up the chair to help with consistent enforcement of those rules. Okay, now we'll move into a few tips and sort of pitfalls. So again, setting the right tone is critical. Making sure that the meeting doesn't get personal, it's never helpful. So keeping it professional, sort of no matter what's going on. And that doesn't have to mean that it's cold, but boundaries are important. Evaluating equipment. Sometimes it comes up if you're using microphones, maybe double check the recordings to make sure that paper shuffling isn't loud or obscuring voices, or other quality control measures you might want to take. Provide information ahead of time on the procedures and repeat it as needed throughout the meeting. This one's so simple. Thank people for their testimony, but I'll tell you what, it goes a long way. Watch for nonverbal cues. I wish I could see yours, but I can't, so they're very important. Acknowledge that planning decisions are political and personal. Yeah, it is what it is, and acknowledging that can really take a lot of heat out of conversations, and showing extraordinary patience. Now, common hurdles and mistakes.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Sorry to butt in. I'm kind of curious what everyone has trouble with public meetings. Are there certain areas that you guys find more complicated than others? It might just be helpful to throw some out and we can see if we can spend a little more time on those than others. Is that okay to do, Casey?
Absolutely. Thanks. Yes.
Or everyone's meeting perfect?
I think a public meeting has a tendency to get more conversational than it should be, in the sense that you have a set procedure that you need to try to follow to be fair to all the candidates or all the applicants. And sometimes a commissioner or in a town meeting will have a council person kind of go off on a tangent, like she said, and you're going down a rabbit trail that you don't necessarily want to be down. And so you have to keep in line with what that procedure is And if need be, as the chairman, then you stop what's going on and get back on track with the procedure. I think that's very important. I think it's only fair to the applicant as well as it helps make a better decision-making process.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's great. Thanks for sharing.
Anyone online?
Good reminder. Folks online too, you're welcome to speak up or raise your hand and I can help unmute you. Any other examples?
I feel like we have been experiencing in the county commission meeting, you know, neighbors or the public that comes to make a statement or our board, but then it kind of getting sidetracked with neighbors kind of trying to talk to each other. Essentially, like what we've been talking about is how do we stop these essentially what become neighborhood meetings from happening within our meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, especially I feel like in smaller towns.
Yeah, I've heard that one quite a bit as well. That can definitely happen. And I'd be curious if anyone out there has some good tips. What I tend to hear is going back to role of the strong chair and kicking the meeting off with the groundwork rules and expectations. It can be hard when friends convene. Any other thoughts?
I'd be curious what other boards have for timelines for public comment. We've kind of gone back and forth between 3 and 5 minutes, and sometimes we just kind of throw it out the window. So I'm curious if other boards, you know, throw out time for every meeting or kind of how they go about that.
Yeah, and Jacob, I'd like to play on that for just a second, and that's, yeah, you know, not always do you have an applicant that can get their point across quickly and efficiently, but in my view anyway, it seems like they need to be heard. So calling time on them before you've got the full story may cut off an important piece of it.
Well, and one thing you could do though as a board is even if you have time, you could still grant extra time too. That's just make a simple motion.
I would like to say something about that. We're from a smaller town and really like how you put in one of the points that you have to acknowledge that planning is not only personal, but it's also political. And I just feel if people are allowed to be heard, and then the people on the board, or you know, people that are running the meeting can acknowledge that person is upset or has a really fair complaint, then that person can know they're heard. I often think the meetings can turn more into political and professional, and they take out the personal part of it. So we still are in Delta County, which is a smaller rural county, and I think we need to put the personal back in, and then if people feel like they're heard, they can move slowly quicker.
Could someone close to the microphone just briefly restate that? I caught part of it, but I just want to make sure I heard that.
I was just going off your bullet point where you acknowledge that the planning commission's decisions are also personal, not just political.
Did you get that, Casey?
Not quite. I'm sorry.
Is the microphone right there? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I think it's important to go with not only just stating as the board or the people in charge that it's political, but it's also personal. And when people get up to the mic to share what they're having problems with or what they want to see happen, I feel like they're intimidated a lot and made to feel like, you know, they're not presenting it professionally enough. And we're still in a smaller rural community, and we need to listen to people and really let them know we're listening and that their voice matters, because it does. And if we keep it more personal as well as political, I think we can move the meetings along quicker because people will feel like they're being heard.
Yeah. Yeah, great point. Very personal stuff. Mm-hmm.
And it looks like Joanne on Zoom has her hand up.
Yeah, I do.
I'm sorry. And I'm sorry, Joanne, I don't mean to cut you off. The meeting is for planning commissioners. So if there's something we can help you with, please feel free to email and we can chat about that another time, or contact me or Carl or any other staff people.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to a few more thoughts. That was a great pause, Shay. Good thoughts from everybody. Okay, let's keep them rolling. So here are some common hurdles and mistakes that we tend to see. So probably not surprising to anyone out there, you know, not being prepared or asking enough questions, right? Not fully developing that record, asking for a vote of the audience, showing bias before a decision is made, or attempting to be the applicant or architect, etc. So this is the decisions should be the fun part, but boy, it's the tough part. Another big one is avoiding let's make a deal. The key is to think about and ask questions designed to get at, does the project meet the standards or not? Making a deal, I'm sure you've run into it and are already thinking of some of the issues that can come up with that. And in fact, we'll have a scenario question on that soon. Some other thoughts, we already talked about social media a little bit, but common hurdles and mistakes: avoiding showing bias, consider your intent when you're asking a question. Think of the front page newspaper test. And, you know, that's the sort of obvious, but how would this look on the front page of a newspaper? And making sure you're not using social media to argue, condemn, attack, or even set the record straight, because we do in fact have a record. So that's just a tricky road to try and go down. Leave it to the staff or PIOs, public information officers, whoever is the appropriate person locally. Establish and discuss often a social media policy. If you don't have one, think about it, talk about it. That can be a really good way to avoid some of those questions before they come up. Another thing that comes up is increasing use of technology. So some questions, you know, is it acceptable to be on your phone in a meeting or hearing? I hear all kinds of responses to that, all the way from no, not at all, be present, to yeah, but I'm getting relevant information and sharing it, and, you know, making sure everyone hears it so it's on the record. So, you know, it's, hey, what if it's relevant? And then other questions that can come up like, well, when does an email thread or text become subject to open meetings law? You know, oops, we've got quorum on this thread and we're discussing public business. What about that? So technology can be good and it can be a challenge. And there is some case law. It's from the Fourth Circuit, so it's persuasive, but there's some case law that's developing, and some of it says that in this one case, at least, a commissioner's Facebook page was considered a tool of governance. So it's worth thinking about if you are using social media, how you're doing that, and then reflecting on what that sort of means as far as public access. And you maybe have seen headlines about sometimes, I don't know who, I'll just say politicians, I can't remember, but there's been some blocking of people, you know, is that okay? So there's lots of questions and case law developing around this, and, you know, no matter, basically it comes down to, in my opinion, get together, talk about what your policy is, talk about whether it's adequate and what else you may want to do to make sure that the tools that you have and that you want to use and that work in your community are working well and helping processes rather than making them muddier. Okay, so on that note, defensible procedures. this boils down to consistency is key. So this is making sure that you've got consistency in your noticing, opportunity to be heard, rules are clear, your process is followed, finding of facts are strong. We'll talk more about those in a moment. You're having unbiased and timely decisions, and records are complete. And why? Because decisions can be challenged. Quasi-judicial actions can be challenged through state rules, and decisions can be overturned if there's an abuse of discretion, if it exceeds jurisdiction, or if they're arbitrary and capricious. Of course, they'll be upheld if the record of decision demonstrates otherwise. So that's why, because they can be overturned. How do you make strong motions? Well, well-prepared motions do take some effort. They explain to the applicant and audience and everyone how the decision was made, and it's good to agree on procedures that will be used for meetings and for motions ahead of time and then implement those. And of course, make sure that the motions speak to the findings of fact rather than opinion. The other question that I sometimes get here is, what's the best sort of order of process? And, I kind of think 6 of one, half dozen another. Whether you start with a motion and then discuss, or discuss, then make a motion. To me, the key is to keep the discussion focused on whether or not the application meets the standards, and have deliberation that communicates how the decision is made to staff and the applicant and the audience. Oh, and it's a team effort. Yeah, that's a reminder to me to say, it's often good to take turns making motions and seconds so that everyone gets seasoned and that newcomers to the commission can get their feet wet in that. How to avoid getting tripped up? A couple thoughts here. You could, before voting as one complex motion, you can vote on conditions one at a time. You can also, it's a pretty slick move, move to approve for reasons listed in the staff report, and that effectively includes the staff report and the findings. It's a nice way to do it. And speaking of the findings of fact, a few comments here. So these are critical. These are the factual foundations for your conclusions about whether the standards were met. These are the legal footprints or breadcrumbs. Facts must address the standards, so ask questions designed to get evidence related to those. And they also show that your adopted process was followed. So if that comes into question, then you can use those finding of facts to show, hey, this is our process, and look, we followed it. Findings of fact should conform with the comprehensive plan, and make sure that you're not making decisions based on an opinion or gut. And oh yes, as a tip, you can raise highlights from a work session. So if you did a work session on something and you're trying to figure out how to incorporate that work and bring it into the record, if that's necessary for whatever you're working on, then you can raise the highlights from that and include them in there. So that gets all the information out in front of everybody. And one of the keys here is that, based on some Colorado case law, if your decision would be looked at in a court of law, hopefully not, but if it was, then what some case law says is a trial court's review will be based solely on the record that was before the governmental entity, and that decision must be affirmed by the court unless there's no competent evidence in the record to support it. So it was arbitrary or capricious, which we talked about earlier. And basically what that is saying is, hey, develop a good record and you show that decisions are related to the standards and you're following the process, and then that keeps you on the straight and narrow. Okay. Following review criteria. So this, I just wanted to pause and talk about how this protects substantive due process. It shows decisions based on compliance with criteria are key, and it's important that the criteria themselves are not vague or they would be considered unconstitutionally void. And then for conclusions, the tip here is conclusions must state why an application meets criteria. So in other words, conclusory statements are sort of insufficient. You'll want to state why the application meets the criteria, not just that it does. Okay, a few final tips. Oh, was there a question?
So when you say criteria, are you talking about the land use code itself?
Yeah, any of your applicable standards and your review criteria, yes.
And So should those be made as finding of fact as well as the comprehensive plan in a motion?
Yeah, you could certainly do that. This, you know, this conforms with this aspect of the comprehensive plan and with these portions of the code, you know, approved. Absolutely. Good question. Did that answer it fully?
Yeah, this following review criteria
Okay.
sounds a little ephemeral. I mean, I can't quite nail it down, but if it's with respect to the land use code, it's criterion set out in the code for approval or disapproval, I understand it. If it's some other criteria you're talking about, I don't understand it.
No, I'm talking about the code.
Right, okay.
Yeah, you're right on track. Good question. Keeping me clear, I appreciate it. Okay, so a few final tips. Detailed deliberation informs better motions, the community and a judge, hopefully not, but a judge, on how a decision was made. Avoid vague or non-specific motions and ask yourself, would someone understand this far in the future? Watch for bias against difficult people and make sure you're always looking for legitimate points and solutions. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know. That one seems small, but I think it's huge and very important. And even as the land use experts on that commission, can't know everything. You clearly know a lot, but can't know everything. It's important. You don't need to explain or apologize for the process. In fact, the process is critical and really protects public input, protects as we're applying rules to specific individuals, and protects decision makers as well. Beware of side conversations. That's come up tonight already, and similar use of electronics during meetings. And here in bold at the bottom, this is my favorite thing on the whole slide. If they don't like the outcome, they'll attack the process. So we can think of trying to do all kinds of things like negotiation and whatever, if it's not necessarily part of the process, but if to think that we could get to a better outcome and that would sort of calm everything, what I tend to see is it doesn't, because if they don't like the outcome, they'll attack the process. Okay, here's a quick story. This is out of Lakewood, and in 2016, they decided to try and do their public participation a little differently and created an online platform. And basically what they found was kind of incredible. They increased their public participation by 800%, if you can believe that. This is their data from 2019. So they did this obviously before COVID, and it did help them deal a little bit better, it seemed, with any disruption. But pretty interestingly, they now have some good data on what works and what doesn't. I put a little red arrow here on this bar chart because this shows participation throughout the time of day. And effectively what they did was they've got an online platform where citizens can go in and comment on upcoming anything way ahead of time. So they've expanded their input period, and I think they do 10 days, but don't quote me on that. Can't remember. But they've expanded the period to give people more time to give their input at a time that works for them. And so what this bar chart shows is they have found that people most like to comment there around 11 a.m. There's another spike sort of just after lunch, basically during the midday. And where there's this huge dip happened to be right during the time they used to hold their in-person meetings. So the time when people are actually least engaged and least available was exactly when they were meeting. And that was pretty mind-blowing for them, and they've adjusted a bit accordingly. So, this kind of approach certainly doesn't work for everyone, but I think it's kind of illuminating to think about when people are available and how you might add prongs to your approach of public engagement to increase the effectiveness of meetings. And they've got a whole presentation on this. If you're interested, let me know and I can send you the link. It's about an hour, very interesting. So in conclusion for this section, before we dive into some scenario questions, it's one of those common old sayings that a popular decision isn't always good, a good one isn't always popular. But as far as a planning commission goes, it's the responsibility to protect current and future public health, safety, and welfare. Back to that police power, even if it's not a popular decision in the moment. So always keeping that public good in mind and at the forefront. All right, let's dive in. I have several. I'm not overstating. I can't count them quickly, but maybe like 8 or 10. So we may not necessarily do all of them, but I do want to see how far we can get in some of these questions. So again, just unmute and yell out as you like. So this first one, a local developer brings updated plans to the staff the day before a hearing. There's tremendous pressure for staff to allow the applicant to make last-minute changes. And the question is, what should staff do? A is quickly forward the new information to planning commission members or elected board and amend the staff report. B, explain to the developer why this last-minute action is not appropriate or workable. C, explain that the locally adopted process is the one that must be followed to ensure staff, referral agencies, if that's part of it, and boards and commissions have time to review. Who wants to take a stab at it?
It's C.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. And, I would say C is the better choice. B, it could be an option as well, but absolutely. Good job. What are the local requirements? Discuss the process. And this was really getting at the importance of everyone having the same information. And that, if it's necessary, you could think about delaying a hearing or doing a continuance, something like that. So it's not that we don't want to accommodate new information if it's needed. It's just, we've got to make sure everyone has the chance to review so that we're all on the same page and clear about what we're deciding. And lots of different local twists on those as well. Okay, how about this one? An unpopular development application would likely go over a lot better if they had better design. That happens a lot. You decide to impose a condition of approval, which is a design standard that the town has not adopted, because it'll calm the opponents, make it a better project. Is this a worthwhile and pragmatic solution? Thoughts?
No.
No. Straight to the point. Any elaboration? You don't have to, just curious.
Well, if it's not adopted, then it's just something you can't do. That's all I can say.
There you go. Hey, that's all you have to say. That's exactly right. Acting outside of authority, it risks governmental immunity, which we'll talk about a little later. It's also one thing that I think of is it could possibly, maybe not officially, but at least create a perception of precedent for future applicants. So giving your future self some headaches. It could also maybe lead to a challenge, which would not be fun. So yeah, no is right. How about this one? You have been so busy, you did not get a chance to review your packet before the hearing. What should you do? I can't tell you how many creative answers I've heard to this. How about these thoughts? Don't show up, contact staff to find out if there will be a quorum, get their advice, email the other board or commission members before to get their thoughts on how you should vote, call your chair to see what they think. What do you think? And again, I'm being a little tricky. Sometimes, you could argue for certain answers. Okay, no big interest in this one. Oh, what was that?
This one, F, or E rather, show up and listen.
Adding one, there we go. Go listen. Yeah, I would say, yeah, what you're getting, A is certainly wrong. In this one, I would say B is great. Contact staff, find out what's going on, get their advice. Maybe D, get advice to the seasoned chair. Certainly not C, that could create bias or prejudgment, ex parte, not good. Lots of things that you can consider doing to get engaged, get advice, get up to speed. Yeah, but certainly not C. I would at least point out that. Okay, how about this one? A well-respected citizen at the public hearing stands up and asks the commission to take a vote of the audience to demonstrate how many people there are in opposition to the project. What should the chair do in this case? We've got a few options, and maybe you'll come up with others on this one too. Ask the citizen to sit down, take control of the vote of the audience. Moving forward with the vote there. Thank the citizen for showing up to provide comments and explain how the process works to provide input. Remind the person that everyone's voice needs to be heard individually. Explain the audience votes and similar outbursts can dissuade people from expressing opposing viewpoints. D, have police immediately escort the person out of the room.
I think it's D.
I hear.
That's what we do up here in Peonia.
Yeah. Hey, and you know what? In defense of D, I have heard that, well, actually what they were saying was that just having a police presence, just hanging out there, was helpful to calm a particularly heated process that they were going through. So that does come up. Yeah, I heard someone say B works, yes. C could possibly work too. Really the key here is keeping control of the meeting, reading the rules ahead of time and reminding them of them. And then remembering that a vote of the audience is not a finding of fact. And that those who show up don't necessarily represent the community at large. And it is the role of the Planning Commission to keep the community in mind. Okay, that was a fun one. How about this one?
I have a question about
yep.
comment. So I know there are people in the room that give comment, but what happens with written comment that's submitted? Is there some way that it gets acknowledged? I mean, is it appropriate to acknowledge written comments that come in for the Planning Commission, or is it, how is that best addressed and dealt with?
It's a good question. Yeah, so it certainly becomes part of the record, which is key. If there's, I've heard of varying local ways of handling that. And I would actually turn that back to staff and see what some staff here tonight think that is the most effective thing. I like doing that. What does staff think?
For me, I feel like there's kind of two different approaches. If it's received early enough, we can include that in the packet and hand it out to everyone. If it's not, then we can read it into the, read it into the record during the meeting. I don't know what you guys do, Carl.
Well, I mean, if whenever information comes in, we try to get it out. But it's going to be up to the commission to determine if they've had enough time to consider it, and may end up continuing the matter in order to consider it, if that's their choice to do that.
Good thoughts. Good question.
Anyone in Orchard City want to answer that? All right now.
Okay. For time's sake, I think I'll just mention the next one, but we won't spend time on it. So this is a citizen in the audience starts asking the applicant questions. Is this acceptable? And some say, of course, you can't hinder free speech. Others say, no, questions must be directed or raised to the board or commission to maintain control of the proceeding. And my thoughts here are generally remind them of whatever the rules are for your meeting or your hearing, and to not give over control of that hearing. So getting us back on track with how things should be going. But how about this one? An opponent of a project challenges the time limit. I heard a thought on this earlier tonight, demanding the full time that she needs to provide her testimony. What are your thoughts here? The chair should what? thank her for her testimony, but remind her there's a time limit. It's got to be followed. B, go ahead and give her 1 more minute. C, allow her to exceed the time limit only if others in the audience will give her their time. Any thoughts? What have you done?
Well, it depends on how many people are at that meeting.
Good thought. If it's not many, lower stakes.
I mean, I said before, sorry, I said, I'll just repeat what I said before. You could just make a motion to the board to ask to extend the time for a minute. And, you know, it's up to the board to decide. I don't know if it's really, I mean, the chair probably can make that motion unilaterally, but it'd be best just to say I'd entertain a motion to extend time. And someone could say so moved and second it and vote on it and then just move on. Because I think ultimately people want to get the information needed to make the decision.
There you go. Yeah, that's an approach as well. And one other thought I would throw out there is along the lines of consistency, is considering that if you do decide to do that, then you may need to be doing that again for others to avoid appearing or being unfair. So yeah, and then to the other point of depending on how many people are in the room, that could work or that could not. And then the other thought that one community brought up is that they preferred not doing that because they didn't want to incentivize packing the house to delay a decision. That can come up. But I think it really depends on what decision are we talking about? What community are we talking about? You know what might work for yours. So all good thoughts on that one. How about this one? A chair has asked people not to repeat testimony, but someone's saying pretty much the same thing as the last guy. That never happens, right? So what does the chair do in this case? Cut him off as quickly as possible. Don't want things to get out of hand, keep control of the meeting, don't want to be here all night. Or B, allow people giving testimony their allotted time, despite whether they repeat what others have said. Or your own other additions.
I would say B, because sometimes there's some very important issues, and town government and board of trustees need to understand, as well as the mayor and the staff, that there's a lot of concerns, not just one person. There's a lot of concerns about it. I would say give them their 3 minutes.
All right, give them their freedom. Other thoughts?
Along that line, I think something that I've seen work really well is at the start of the meeting, mention that if you agree with someone, please say that. Stand up and say, I agree with this person standing right next to me and everything that they said, and maybe I want to add a couple of points, and that can help with, so you hear them and you know that there's a second person that fully agrees or disagrees. But you also can try to be a little bit efficient if, if you have a packed house and you're going to be there till midnight and it's going to, take a long time anyway. I've seen that work in some communities.
Yeah, that's a good one. And one community told me that they like to ask just for new comments, remind everyone what's been said and then ask only for new comments. That doesn't really get at the ideas and concerns that were just raised. Sort of a different path, but some do that. And to me, the key on this question is remember to be courteous and demonstrate listening. So really getting at the responses that we did just hear. How can we make sure people feel heard, make sure the record's developed, that kind of thing. Okay, this one. We have 3 more. Ooh, coming down to the wire. Someone testifies and argues your point or contradicts you in a public hearing. Do you engage in a debate to ensure the correct point is heard? Some possible options. A, no, you are not there to win people over to your viewpoint. You're there to hear and consider the facts and testimony and make a decision based on that. B, yes, the record must be made clear who's right and which facts are correct. C, no, avoid debate, but when his testimony is complete, restate your point concisely to avoid confusion. Thoughts on this one?
Casey, doesn't this depend a little bit on the timing?
Oh, say more. What do you mean?
The point and counterpoint, because testimony is generally given before council raises their opinions. So usually the public input is over by the time council is sitting there talking through their opinion on the applicant. Isn't that generally the case?
Oh, what a beautiful answer. Yeah, but not always. So yeah, that would be the ideal scenario. And I think what you just pointed out is that you must have a process that works and a structure that works, and that's wonderful to hear. Some communities I hear from let it get a little blurred, and some communities, or maybe just some decisions, get kind of heated and people can't quite keep to their portion of the agenda, I suppose. So yeah, if you've got, that's a great answer. If you've got a good structure, hopefully this isn't an issue. And really, to play along with the question, I would say the answer is A, because your point is on the record, decorum is key, and to your point, process is key. So, oh, and you know, this also reminds me, one community said that they were experiencing someone providing false information, and asked, but what about that? Shouldn't that be argued and corrected? Ultimately, through discussion in that workshop, they said, we'll just deal with that during the planning commission discussion. So the portion that you pointed out, but that came up as well. So that can be what an interesting wrinkle. Okay. Good. All right, second to last one in this section. This is when it becomes clear that a planning commission must deny a project and the applicant feels she's not been treated fairly and implies she may sue if her project isn't approved. What should the commission do in this case? A is approve the project, but with conditions that you expect she'll not be able to meet. B, be sure the motion used to deny the project is clear and the staff report and discussion lays out which standards were not met. C, deny the project, but the planning commission chair should call her afterwards to explain why she was denied, make sure she feels heard. What do you think of this one?
B.
To the point. Yes, that's right. So this is an example of why findings of fact showing how a project does or doesn't meet standards is so key, and probably the importance of making motions that are thorough and clean. Because again, if your decision is challenged, I mean, if she wants to sue, okay, if your decision is challenged, then as we talked about earlier, the court's review will be based on the record in front of the governing entity, and the decision of that entity must be affirmed unless it was arbitrary or capricious. So if you've done solid findings of fact, you've made sure that all of the evidence, you've gotten to it about the standards and the decision is based on the standards, then that's the protection that you really need. Well done. All right, here's our last one in this section. The applicant claims the planning commission's decision has removed the highest and best use of their property. And the question here is this a reasonable expectation? A, no. Case law supports that no one has the right to expect the highest and best use of their property, but can expect a reasonable use. B is yes, the Constitution protects everyone's ability to do what they please with their land. Or other thoughts you can add if you like. What do you think of this one? No one wants to take the takings question? That's okay. I can give some thought. Oh, to somebody? No. Okay. I'll give some thoughts. So this one's getting at takings, basically. And as I mentioned before, and we had the disclaimer, but This is not legal advice. But this does come up from time to time. So a takings violates the 5th and 14th Amendments of the US Constitution, and it's the removal of all economically viable use. The answer to this one would be A. And so there was one county I was talking with, and the way that they put it was a cabin is still an economic use. And what they meant by that was they were having a lot of people complain about some of their rules that effectively prohibited sort of large second homes, basically like a big cabin that you would maybe want to spend a week in, or I don't know, whatever, some amount of time. And people were upset because by the rules, they could really only build a very small kind of uncomfortable structure that maybe you could rough it for a weekend, but wouldn't really want to spend too much time there. And so like a little cabin. And so the way they put it was a cabin's still an economically beneficial use. So I like that sort of turn of phrase to help me remember one way to think about it. So, and also on this slide, I like to pause, and as a practice pointer, I would say if there is a threat of litigation, then continuance is appropriate. So also if there's new information or if there's uncertainty about criteria, these are situations where you could do a continuance, so we're making sure that we're really taking the time and considering all the information we need to. Okay. That was fun. All right, we have our last main section now, and I think we're doing pretty well on time, so that's good news. But I'm going to move us through here with some relative speed, just as a heads up. So we're going to think again in this legal and ethical section about legislative versus quasi-judicial hat. So which hat are you wearing? What's the type of action? We can see here that master plans are clearly legislative in this, chart. Comprehensive zoning, legislative, zoning text amendments, legislative. Rezonings is where it gets a little tricky, because in Colorado, rezonings are both legislative and quasi-judicial. They're quasi-judicial because you cannot have ex parte communications, and they can be challenged. They're legislative because they can be challenged specifically by initiative and referendum. So they're both. But then we move clearly into quasi-judicial actions like special exceptions, variances, that kind of thing. So all kinds of actions come up. And really the key is, how do you feel? Do you feel like you're making law, or do you feel like you're a judge applying law? Hopefully not being that shocked, but maybe. And so now let's dig into a couple common questions. Ex parte comes up a lot. So this is a lengthy definition, but stick with me. Ex parte is any written or verbal communication outside of a regularly noticed public hearing between an official with decision-making authority and one or more of the parties involved, but not all parties, for something that is under or about to be under consideration by that official, where they're seeking to influence or just present information. There's a lot going on there, but that's the key about what an ex parte contact is. And I would point out that it's improper because all applicants requesting a decision by a local body that's acting within their scope, they're entitled to due process protections like we've been talking about. So this comes from the 5th Amendment of the US Constitution, the 14th Amendment, and also the Colorado Constitution as well. And property rights are at issue in land use applications. So all three of those things do apply. So how do we do that? To preserve public confidence and due process, the Board or Commission should ensure the public and interested parties have the opportunity to know and respond to all information that the board's considering in decision making. And the board should also ensure that each member has the opportunity to know and consider information. So that's the broad view. What do you do when this happens? It happens all the time, right? So basically, here are the key steps. Stop the person, explain why the contact is inappropriate, disclose it to staff and again at the meeting. Now, depending on the severity, recuse or leave the room, also depending on what your local process says. If you don't have one, I would encourage you to talk about it, whether you want to make one. Consider adopting formal procedures. That's the point. It's just so much less awkward to have that laid out ahead of time and just follow it than to deal with it in the moment. And then finally, encourage participation in the process. So a couple examples of things you might consider. Here's Chaffey County. They've got a little notice on their website that people can be directed to or just happen upon as they're looking about how to engage in the processes. Wheat Ridge has business cards that planning commissioners just keep on them. And so they're able to stop people and say, you know, I can't talk with you right now. Here's why, but please stay engaged in the process. Here's how you can engage. And that way they know how they can be heard. And that seems to make people feel good. And if you're wondering, how do you know when an application, it says is under review or about to be under review? Well, what does that mean? Littleton sends out an email when an application is received, and it of course has a timestamp on it. So all of the members are notified that way, and that's how they know when something is about to be considered. But on that point, you can't necessarily take that as your bright line rule, because your attorneys rightfully do interpret that differently. And so what's really critical is going to be following what your attorney says it means to be about to be under review. So that's the way that they were advised and that they handle it. But if that would work for you, great, but you'll want to ask your attorney about if that's what makes sense with their interpretation. Because what'll keep you on the straight and narrow is following their legal advice. Okay, let's do one ethical scenario question. This one is a site visit. This brings up a lot of interesting comments in my experience. So here you're on a site visit before a hearing. The owner or rep meets you just to let you in, let you in the gate, doesn't follow you, doesn't talk with you. Oh wait, sorry, they do follow you. They don't talk with you, but they shadow you. And you're pretty sure one of the neighbors has seen you. What do you do? Here are some options. A, you do not need to stir up suspicion by disclosing that they let you onto the property. You know you didn't talk with them, and that's what matters, so it's not an ex parte conversation. B, disclose it at the hearing that they let you in, but you didn't discuss the property or project, proceed to vote. C, call staff ahead of time, give them a heads up and get advice. D, don't go on any site visits anymore. Just got very burned by that experience. What are the thoughts on this one? Go ahead and unmute.
It seems like B would be the safest.
Yeah, definitely want to disclose that. I might also say, I'll just throw in for time's sake. C, there we go. Yep. C is a good one too. And you know, this scenario gets at perception too. If the neighbor voices concerns you know, about information outside of the hearing. So yeah, lots of fun things to consider here. And then also, if anyone out there has other thoughts on ex parte contacts, what any experiences, ideas, or tips. I like to include this picture because a lot of people like to talk about how they like to do a drive-by, but then there are various sand traps that can happen. So, you know, any thoughts that you want to share as far as what you do locally that seems to work well?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you live in a small town, it's kind of hard to be perhaps neutral all the time. Even what if there was information you heard about something before you were even on the board? Or I mean, what about historical information or historical contact before something's become an issue and brought to a board? How do you recommend handling that? How do you stay neutral? How do you just announce it beforehand, or do you recuse yourself completely? Or
yeah, I have so many follow-up questions in order to answer that, but Because I think it really depends on in my mind, it really depends on the exact scenario. Like, is it just historical information? There's really not going to be an application that's about to be under review. It's just kind of something that you happen to know in the past, and now you're on the board, and now there's an application. I mean, we all have experiences in our communities and some background knowledge. First and foremost, well, this is where I should have started. Go to staff and ask for their advice. But you know, we do all have some level of background knowledge. It is important to work as best you can to avoid prejudging a matter, and maybe have that kind of discussion with staff, and consider if you have what your procedures say about how to handle potential bias discussions. That's how I would start thinking about it. And hey, this is a good actually opportunity to again throw it back to any staff in the room with thoughts. What do you think about your processes? How might you advise?
Well, I think it's kind of what we say a lot. It depends. It's factually based. You know, what is the situation? What is the information? How old is it? How related is it? You know, like you said, there's a lot of questions that go with that to make that determination. But the main point is, are you in a position to make an unbiased decision? Because you haven't been swayed in any way prior to that, or you haven't talked to somebody to, you know, see how they're going to vote ahead of time, that type of thing.
How do you know if the information is true or not?
That's a good question. That's why I say it's factually based, you know, really.
Yeah. Good thoughts.
You want to add anything?
All right.
Okay.
Okay, for time's sake, I'm going to keep us moving. Let's talk a little bit about conflicts. There's a conflict of interest when you're a member of a governing body and you have a personal or private interest in the matter that's pending before you. So it's not a conflict to have an opinion. It arises when you act on that opinion and personally benefit. So it's putting your benefit above the general public interest. What do you do? So Colorado law has some requirements here. You have to do all of these things if you do have a conflict. And again, this isn't like a generally applicable kind of thing. It's really that direct benefit. Colorado law requires you do all of the following: disclose to staff and at the hearing, do not vote, and do not attempt to influence others to vote. So that's in statute. There is an exception. So you can vote, notwithstanding your conflict, in a very, very particular set of circumstances, which is if your participation is necessary to achieve a quorum or otherwise allow the body to act, and you've made an appropriate disclosure ahead of time in writing to the Secretary of State. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you can't vote, but you have to, then I hope this triggers a little light bulb for you, and you can look that up and consider making that disclosure. So there's a little way to continue. Okay, and we do need to keep moving a little bit, so I'm just going to talk us through this one. This is where an applicant claims that one of the council members has conflict because he always votes no on her projects. That council member should not vote on this project because of the appearance of a conflict and the importance of due process. And the answer here is that this might be bias, but it's not a conflict. So there's a little distinction there. A conflict is really when you're going to have a personal benefit. Okay. You're convinced your fellow planning commission member has a conflict. What do you do? And I'll read you through this one as well. Talk with the planning commission member at least a few days before the hearing. Yeah, that would work. And some have said that's what they like to do. Set up an informal meeting with a few other members so that they can help you explain why it's a conflict to this member. I don't know about that one. C, talk with staff for guidance. Absolutely. D, raise your concern in the planning commission meeting before the proposal is heard. So, you know, I would say mostly I tend to like A and C. I've heard for some, they've said, well, for us, I just bring it up right to them, that's our culture. For others, they would say, no, we have to, be very by the books and not talk directly. So I tend to find that people's response to this question is very dependent on not only local culture, but local policy and procedure as well. So I would say check yours out. If you don't have one, talk about it, consider putting something in place. Because again, it's easier if we know ahead of time what to expect people to do, and then we just follow that rather than have to deal with it ad hoc. Okay, open meetings. We've got the Colorado Sunshine Law. The basic principle here is that public policy is public business. So this is just requiring public notice for meetings where formal action occurs, public business is discussed, or quorums present. Minutes are required when formal action occurs. And as a suggested rule of practice, just keep things open and noticed with minutes, and then everything's sort of all good to go. And if something doesn't go well, then a state or local public body can cure a violation of this law by holding a subsequent meeting that does comply. As long as it's not just a rubber stamp and it's actual, put the effort in and it's true subsequent meeting to cure that, then that can be cured. So that is good to know. Okay, I'm not going to talk you through this one. I want to hear your thoughts. After a particularly rough public hearing, the planning commissioners agree to grab a beer and relax and unwind. Are there any issues or concerns with this? And some initial thoughts are A, this could be seen as an unnoticed public meeting at which they may have discussed public business. B, the perception could be that this is where the real work gets done, decisions made about upcoming policies or projects. C, it's okay after the public meeting, but not before the public hearing. Oh, that's conflicting. That should be public hearing, not meeting. What do you think of this one?
It's B or A.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, B or A, good. And C, I think is sort of ignore. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Drinking before a public meeting, probably not good form. I think going into a public hearing and talking about the PC was probably a violation of something. But the sunshine laws is an interesting topic because a number of the questions you asked preceding that slide actually had some potential sunshine law conflicts, in my opinion. But maybe you can shed light on that.
Would be curious which ones. And I know we're so short on time, I may have to just go back and look and send thoughts to the staff who organized this.
I think it was a group of planning commission meetings talks to the person that would have the conflict. You get together beforehand and you talk to them. I think that's what the one I was kind of wondering about was.
Yeah, and that was not a preferred solution, right?
Yeah, that was problematic.
Yeah, you're a very sharp group. Yeah, and one of the issues with C is that it ignores that something could be remanded back to this body. And so what then? Are you then disqualified? That wouldn't be great. So some of the issues that come up here are considering when the potential to discuss business is very high, that perception can be as impactful as reality on public trust, and that you can always just notice things and then you're good to go. So if you really want to do that, just notice it. Okay, Immunity Act. So this protects government officials when acting within the scope of their duties, but it can be lost. So you can lose immunity by prejudging a matter, engaging in ex parte, making a decision that clearly violates established laws. It just gets worse from here. Acting beyond the scope of your authority, ignoring or going against publicly given legal advice, or established procedures or ordinances. Okay, yes, so immunity can be lost. Now we've got just a couple, well, 3 scenarios, and then I only have a few closing slides. So let's go kind of quickly here. The mayor, who has been a community leader for decades, calls up the newest planning commissioner or council member a few days before the public hearing to give some background on this application and the agenda. is there an issue? And so some options are, while the intention may be noble, the mayor is engaging in ex parte. B, it's inappropriate because the new board member may feel pressured to vote in alignment. Or C, as long as the mayor just gives background, then the new member probably doesn't know from years ago, doesn't tell the new member how to vote, then that's okay. Any quick thoughts on that? Maybe A. Yes. This is ex parte. And actually, I might just take us quickly through the other two as well. You've had some good thoughts tonight, and that's been very helpful. So I'll take us quickly through here if you don't mind. So in this one, there's a vote at a planning commission hearing, and then a member decides to testify at the town board meeting to represent the minority opinion. And the question is this an okay approach? And the answers here are, A, this is fine because they don't give up their right to testify. B, it can be divisive. C, if the town board remands the decision, that could be a problem. And really, I tend to zero in on B and C. Some of the keys are that their view is already on the record. So this can kind of be like 2 bites at the apple. Being on the commission is sort of having extraordinary influences compared to everyday citizens. And so sort of exerting that can be taking 2 bites is sort of another piece of that one. And then the final one here, an elected official decides to attend the Planning Commission public hearing for a controversial project and provide public testimony. Is this an okay approach? And the thought here, just to move us along, basically comes down to C, that it could be perceived as the elected official influencing the Planning Commission or prejudging. Not the best approach. And then probably other thoughts are bubbling in everyone's heads. And I'm so sorry, I would love to hear them all. But I do just want to point out, I mentioned this last section, just 3 slides here, started as planning during a pandemic, and I'm trying to adapt it to figure out how to be more helpful with providing resources about planning during disruptions in general, because we all have them for different reasons. And so what do? We've got a few lessons learned from the planning in a pandemic. These are some of the things that communities started talking about a lot. And I just wanted to highlight 4 of them. Budgeting and fiscal health has just really risen to the top. And we've started to develop some resources around that. Equity and inclusivity, like we've talked about, rethinking our public engagement. What is the disruption? How do we make sure that our community can still be involved in these public processes despite, X issue that's going on? Public space and facilities, similarly, what's the disruption as we make decisions about our public spaces? What should we be thinking? And then, of course, COVID certainly exacerbated the affordable housing shortage, which came up earlier, and other disruptions tend to do the same. Housing always seems to be impacted. So those are some of the things that have been bubbling up and that we are starting to try and work on resources around. We have some on our website. This is the continuity of operations tab where you can see some resources for considering budget, TABOR, elections, taxes, all kinds of stuff, a little bit on electronic meetings as well. And then there's the Colorado Resilience Office that I want to mention. Their website is there in the box at the bottom right. And they've got so much information about how to work resiliency into your long-range planning. They've got case studies and resiliency of sort of differing meanings. So you can go poke around on that website, figure out what it means to you, and look at how to integrate it. That's a fabulous resource on there. And so just a couple comments to close. Here's everything we covered tonight. You have sat through almost 115 slides and had all kinds of good thoughts along the way. So we've covered importance of an authority to plan. We've talked about roles and relationships, integrating plans, meeting management, findings, records of decisions, legal and ethical issues. And if you are just hurting for more, I would say, don't let your training sunset here. You can, other meetings you might consider setting up would be talking with water providers to break down those silos, fire, police, assessor's office, great. Other service providers, area agency on aging, and then independent learning. You know, APA Colorado has so much information, so does CCI and CML. And then if you're interested in water in particular, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, which I would advise you talk to our staff member, and she can hook you up with sort of a more crafted plan of how to approach that. But those are sort of the key continued learning things that I would mention. And then other than that, just a big thank you for your time tonight. You really, you really sat through a lot and gave me some good things to think about. I hope you don't mind. I took some notes of some of your thoughts, and the rest of the state is going to benefit from them. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And that's all I've got for you tonight.
Thank you, Casey.
Thanks, Casey.
Awesome, thanks, everyone.
Thanks, have a good night.